So the clean energy resource teams, who are we? What do we do? We are dedicated to connecting communities in Minnesota with the resources that they need to get projects done. And so in some cases that's individuals, they want to put solar on their roof. They need to learn how to do that, and we have resources for them to do that. But we work a whole lot with cities, counties, schools, small businesses, farmers, just about anybody out there, but very much in this focus on community-based projects and community-based resources. So even if we're working with individuals or businesses, we're trying to figure out ways that there could be some kind of educational component or some kind of way for them to network with their peers and get other people to move forward. So really similar goals in that way to MRES. So CERTs is a partnership. I happen to work at the University of Minnesota for our regional sustainable development partnerships. But we also have folks that work at the Great Plains Institute. They just work in the metro. And the Southwest region is staffed by some folks at the Southwest Regional Development Commission. And then the Minnesota Department of Commerce has a couple staff that spend time on the clean energy resource teams too. So that's kind of who we are. It's not a very brief elevator speech, but that's how we're kind of put together. So just going to give you the little bit more about what we do, and then I'm going to dive right into solar. So we help people learn, connect, and act, and we do this on solar. We have a solar PV curriculum that just came out last year that's very detailed. It's best for middle school and high school age students or for adult learners who want to go all the way from what is solar and how does it work to doing their own virtual site assessments and that sort of thing. We do all sorts of blogs and storytelling about successful solar projects so that other people can kind of see what people have done, get inspired, and move forward on their own projects. This is just a sampling from earlier this year. But if any of you get energy stories from me, then you got an email right before I came here. But that's a great way to sign up and see some of those stories, is to get our newsletter. Solar Flare is not the only great newsletter out there, but it is a great one. And then just like MRES, we do a lot of events. So we split the state up into 7 regions, and we have staff for each one of those 7 regions. And we try to do 3 events in each of those regions every year. So those are kick the tires events. So a farmer installs solar, you want to get a bunch of other farmers out to look at it. And that's one event, and we do about 21 of those a year. But these are just some solar events from the last year. And then we do tailored assistance. So in that spirit of getting people out there to act, we partner with USDA on a program called Renewable Energy for Greater Minnesota. And that one is all about getting farmers and rural small businesses to install solar. And so anything from helping them apply to REAP and EQIP, some of these programs out there from USDA, but also doing site assessments and helping connect them with solar installers and kind of going there and talking them through what does it mean to do solar and how will this work for you? How does that work in a dairy operation or in a turkey barn? That kind of thing. So that's one of our programs. We've been working a whole lot on expanding property assessed clean energy, or PACE, in Minnesota. And who's heard of PACE? Anyone? Okay, cool. I'll talk about that a little more later. But it's a way to finance energy projects with your property taxes. So it's a pretty neat way to finance energy projects. It's kind of taking off in Minnesota. And we work to get counties, each one of these counties here has signed up for PACE, and so we run around and try to get counties to sign up for it since they have a taxing authority and can put a lien on pretty much anyone but a resident's property. And then we also do seed grants. So these are small, catalyzing grants. We've given out a little over $1 million in the last several years, and they're usually anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000 for sort of novel projects that have some kind of community-focused plan in place. So we just wrapped up a bunch of projects, and we have case studies coming out on those now. And we're actually going to have another round of seed grants opening up in August and September. So if you have any cool project ideas, be sure to let me know, because we have applications coming open for those. Okay. Oh, I have one more. So we also work on a program called Minnesota Green Step Cities. And we've been doing it for the last 7 years or so, I think. Yeah. And it's a program to get Minnesota cities to work on best practices around energy. And some of them have to do with solar. And so we work with the cities. We teach them all about these best practices. We get them to network with their peers, and then we help them take action and be recognized for their efforts. So we started out with just a handful, like 5 cities, and now I think we're up to 120. But these are all cities actively working on solar and climate change and energy efficiency. So it's a really cool program. So just in case you were wondering, who is CERTs and what does this guy do every day? That's what we're up to. I know that was not exactly brief. It's really hard to find a picture of a female solar installer, by the way. It took me a little while to find this. But I also help out with a program called Just Be Solar, and it's a summer camp, solar summer camp for kids. And I was trying to show them pictures of people working in renewable energy, and I was like, I have to find a female solar installer, and I didn't have a picture of Rebecca Lumberg, so yeah. But anyway, so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about where we are right now with solar in Minnesota, okay? And then after that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the interesting things I think are happening and where we're going to go over the next couple of years. So, does solar energy work in Minnesota? Yes, you betcha it does. So this is a map of Minnesota solar potential. Has anyone used the Minnesota Solar app before? Show of hands? Couple? Okay, so cool. We worked with the University of Minnesota and the State Department of Commerce, and we took LiDAR data that's available for the whole state, which is where they fly planes over with a laser and they take a really nice image of the Earth's surface. But not just the Earth's surface. When it hits trees and buildings and all that sorts of stuff, it comes back. And so we could actually use that to make a shading map of Minnesota, and we put it together with solar resource data for the whole state. So in doing that, we were able to get a map that's the whole state down to 1 square meter. So every time you click, you're clicking on a square meter of Minnesota, and it'll give you a little virtual site assessment to tell you if that place is good for solar or not. So this is the Mayflower Church. You will not be surprised to see that it's a pretty great place for solar. There is solar on the roof here. So this is just an example of one of the great resources we have in Minnesota, and the fact that Minnesota is a pretty great place for solar. If you look at a map of Germany, which has the most solar of any country in the world, right, per capita, they're not a nice orange color like this, or they're sort of purplish blue. And it just means like they have policies, right? We're getting our policies more right, I would say, but we are a nice sunny place for solar. Yeah, so if you want to check out any building or any piece of land in Minnesota to see if it's good for solar, head to mn.gov solar app. That's managed by the Department of Commerce now. Okay, so many of you probably know Stacy Miller. I asked Stacy, hey, what are the numbers on solar before I came? This infographic is actually from earlier this year. So it's already wildly out of date because North Star Solar and Aurora just came online, and so now we're getting closer to 550 megawatts of solar, which is kind of wild because just like 2 years ago, we had 40 megawatts of solar in Minnesota. So we've come a really long way in a very short amount of time. And with the trend right now, we're only going to see that growing even more. Here's their little map of how much solar we had every year. You can see 2016 was a really big year. And already 2017 in the first quarter, we installed more solar than we did all year in 2016. So it's becoming a very solar-powered state here. And we're going to continue to see that, I think. So that's not only, that installed capacity is good for Minnesota, and it's good for Minnesota jobs. So there are more and more people in Minnesota who are working in solar, which is fantastic, right? So we're getting close to 3,000. The last Solar Foundation jobs report on Minnesota, they found that almost 3,000 people in Minnesota were working in energy. Oh yeah, I don't have to go up and point. Fancy. You know what? Maybe I even have a pointer on here. I do. Cool. Here.
This one, though, man, is so much better.
Super bright.
Look at this.
Okay. Well, then I have something. Then I have something in my left hand too, so it just feels more balanced. So solar's having a pretty dramatic impact on Minnesota's economy, is my point. And that same report did have kind of a breakdown of what those jobs were. So when we think of solar jobs, right, we usually think of solar installers, but there's actually a decent amount of jobs outside of the installation of the solar panels themselves. Like my job and Doug's job. Do they pay you, Doug? They do. Okay, good. But yeah, so there are not just installation jobs. We're an industry here that's really supporting a broad array of types of jobs. And then this map over here is where you can see the distribution of those jobs throughout the state. So no huge surprise that the metro is a big center for that, but you see there's a nice, I don't know if that chunk up in Duluth, if that was actually Silicon Energy, which is now a Helene plant, will have a future. But yeah, so solar jobs. Did someone have a question? Oh, there's a solar company from Canada called Helene. And they have a manufacturing facility in the Twin Cities. And when Silicon Energy on the Iron Range in Mountain Iron closed up shop, they decided to take it over. And they're actually going to hire 2 or 3 times as many people as we're working for Silicon Energy. So it's a pretty good thing. This is a little plug for another CERTs resource. It's called the Clean Energy Project Builder, and it's a place where you can go see a lot of these companies. So Mencia, you probably have heard of Mencia. You can go to their website and see a lot of folks who are working in the solar industry in Minnesota too. But this is our directory of solar installers. So feel free to check that out. And if you're a solar installer and you're not on there, then talk to me and we'll get you on there. Okay, so who's heard of community solar? Everyone? Okay, great. So CERTs has done quite a bit of work on community solar and have a lot of resources on the topic. We have been following it since the legislation passed in 2015. And since then, it kind of felt like it took a while for stuff to happen, but there's a lot happening now. And so this is great, right, for those people who, when they went to the solar app, they clicked on their roof and it said, you have a terrible solar resource, I'm sorry. Or for people who live in an apartment or who just don't necessarily want to put solar on their own roof. For people like me who have a sunny but tiny roof that wouldn't really support our home's needs. So you guys get it, you know what it's about, community solar. Install a decent size array somewhere sunny, and then people get to subscribe to that, and their subscription actually shows up on their bill. So my subscription to a community solar garden finally went live this year. Yes. And so I actually have had a negative bill from Xcel Energy for the past couple months. So I'm getting those little credits. I'm still having to pay the solar developer, right? But I'm not paying Xcel right now because it's so nice and sunny. So you guys have probably heard a lot about the Xcel Energy community solar programs, but there are actually quite a few community solar programs across Minnesota, 24 right now, and they're ever growing. So the cooperatives like this because it's a nice way for them to do solar and kind of control solar on their system, right? And then work with their members to let them subscribe to get solar. And then there's a growing number of municipal utilities actually in Minnesota too who are starting to get programs going. So the red there is IOU territory, investor-owned utilities. So that's Xcel and Minnesota Power. But then any of the orange that you see, those are cooperatives in Minnesota who have community solar garden programs. There are a handful of utilities also who are still thinking about it. They haven't launched something yet, but it's in the works. And we're chatting with those folks too. So that's sort of, if you want to do community solar right now in Minnesota, that's where you can do it. And if you know people who live in other utility territories and they want to subscribe, but they can't because their utility doesn't have a program, then let me know, because we're working a lot with utilities, doing a lot of peer-to-peer networking and getting them to kind of understand, oh, such and such did that. Huh, well maybe if they did it, we could do it too. So community solar is growing. This is a chart just from last week, I think, from John Farrell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and they have been doing a decent amount of work on kind of analyzing the community solar program in Minnesota too, and comparing it to the programs offered in other states. If you ask John, he would say, Minnesota's program is the best. And he's not just saying that because he loves Minnesota. He's saying that because the installed capacity in the queue for our program is 400 megawatts. Right now, we have about 80 installed. So orange means design and construction. So we have almost, oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be using this. We have almost 500 megawatts of solar just in the design and construction phase in Minnesota, and then in the interconnection process even more. So you can see that is on track to be a very, very large program. And so we'll get all of this, hopefully most of it, installed in the next couple of years. And this is more, John tells me this is more community solar than all of the programs in the rest of the country combined. So that's a lot. And he doesn't necessarily know if the other states will surpass us. I think a lot of other states have capped programs. The thing that's unique about the Xcel Energy Community Solar Program is there's not necessarily a limit on how much solar can be installed in the program. So we're rocking and rolling on community solar in Minnesota. So the way that Xcel Energy's program works is that other developers build the projects, and then there's a relationship between the operator who built the project, the utility, and you as a subscriber, right? So that's sort of the Xcel Energy program that you've heard a lot about. The other utility programs in Minnesota, they are largely a developer who builds a project for the utility, and then people subscribe, and they just subscribe and work directly with the utility. So that's the other reason that a lot of the utilities in greater Minnesota like these programs, because they get to continue to keep that relationship going with their membership base. Just to talk about a couple other sort of interesting community solar related things that have been happening lately. So CERTs was approached by the Metropolitan Council, who said, hey, we have a number of our member local governments who are curious about community solar. They've been talking about putting out requests for proposals or RFPs to get subscriptions, see like contracts just for them, for community solar. But their lawyers haven't seen this stuff before. It's all new. It seems like it's going to take a lot of time and energy on their behalf, and they're just not sure if they're going to do it. And so we said, well, what if we got people together? We did a joint RFP process for all the local governments that belong to the Met Council. And then we got developers to submit proposals, and we actually went through, scored those proposals, and then accepted them on behalf of all of the Metropolitan Council members, and then did a lottery to kind of get those subscriptions out to the members, and they said, yeah, let's do it. So it's the largest joint procurement is the right term, I think, community solar project in the country. We ended up getting 31 local governments to participate, and then 22 of the Met Council members subscribed for a total of 35 megawatts of subscriptions. And this is one of the projects here. So this is actually getting a lot of attention nationally as a model for local governments to work together with some sort of convening body on community solar subscriptions. And we have a report out about that if you're particularly curious.
When you say government, I mean, what do you mean government? I mean, who's, like the state office building or?
Oh, sure. So yes, it's state. So what we did was it was for state agencies, and then also for cities and counties within the Met Council's jurisdiction.
And they all sign up even though they're all in different locations?
Yep. Yeah, and there were 5 companies who submitted proposals, and so all of those local governments then ended up being offered a mix of community solar subscriptions from the participating developers. Yeah, but they didn't have, they had a standard contract that the Metropolitan Council had already gone through and said, yep, everything's cool, our lawyers say this is great, you don't have to worry about it, you can still look it over, but just to let you know, we're in this together and we've vetted it. So.
Was Falcon Heights? Yeah.
Yep.
Because the mayor of Falcon Heights spoke here.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, Pete Lindstrom, who's the mayor of Falcon Heights, sits at the desk next to me. So he works for CERTs too.
Jason from the Metropolitan Council State, and he went through a little bit of that.
Oh, he did? Okay, so you're familiar with this project a little bit. Okay, cool.
Did you guys get the award on this?
Yes, this also won the Environmental Initiatives Partnership Award this year. So, Yay!
So can a government agency also just participate in a regular
Absolutely.
partnership?
And a bunch of them have
So
just
this is
subscribed
like
on their own.
a cheerleading group to just sort of like get more government involved by saying,
Yes.
have a club of government agencies joining together.
It was particularly beneficial for the slightly smaller local governments who maybe didn't have the capacity to do that whole RFP and contract process on their own. Yeah.
So what is the financing model for this? I mean, do they pay money for their share and then reap benefits, or is it pay as you go, or whatever?
So yeah, they are all some sort of pay as you go. It just kind of depended what the model was. Some of them were a straight up escalator model where it just goes up a little bit every year. Others were a discount. So local governments are risk averse organizations generally, but they've also been around and they're going to be around. So they weren't worried about the 25-year contract terms. So they're like, yep, we'll be here, you know, unlike residents or other folks. But they wanted to make sure that they weren't going to lose taxpayer dollars on it, you know, that they were getting a really good deal. So some of them also went for discount models where the developer was saying, we can guarantee you that you'll get 10% less than the going rate for electricity the entire time you subscribe, you know. So you'll always be saving a little, you just might not save as much as you would in other sorts of setups. That's sort of down in the weeds, but yeah, so there are a couple different models I can tell you more about later if you're interested. Or was that your kind of question too?
It's not a question, just our church, a group of churches worked and kind of went through all that. I wasn't there for the whole time, but they had to do all that research for about 2 years.
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
It is.
From the point of, hey, community solar, that sounds like a cool idea, to actually signing on the dotted line. Yeah, it's a bit of work. So,
Sign, but they haven't built yet, but it should come on. It just seemed to take a long time. but
Yeah.
It's going to come on.
yeah, it's kind of a time-consuming and then process and then waiting, right? Yeah, but this was trying to take a little bit of that work out of that for the participating local governments. Next. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to mention really quick kind of how some of the different collaborations around community solar have been happening. A lot of those co-ops that you saw on the list are Great River Energy co-ops, and so they are already sort of sharing best practices and lessons learned, and so it's not necessarily surprising that a lot of those co-ops were working on it. Dairyland Power was doing sort of similar stuff in Wisconsin and Iowa, where they have a lot of members, and so their couple members here in southeastern Minnesota got to benefit from that too. And then the more sort of new entry to community solar are these municipal utilities. And so these acronyms might mean nothing to you, but SIMPA is the Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency. And they have a number of municipalities that are members. And they decided, hey, our members probably aren't going to do this on their own, or if they are, then it might be kind of a hassle for them. We have this service model. Why don't we put out an RFP, install a real large community solar garden, and then allow each of our members to be a part of that? And so SIMPA and COMPAS, which is the Central Minnesota Power Agency Service, I don't know what the S is for, they decided to do this together actually. And so they have kind of an interesting model where they have just one installation that any of their member municipal utilities can have access to and create programs around. But they're making these little they're calling them billboard solar installations in each of the towns where they have participating utilities. And so when you go to Rochester or Austin or St. Peter, those are the 3 municipalities that have signed up for this so far. They're going to have a very sort of splashy and visible solar installation in town, literally with a billboard or sign next to it that says, "Solar brought to you by your utility. Subscribe here." So it's making solar visible even though it's not necessarily installed in their community. Yeah, so that's kind of a cool model. And then Missouri River Energy Services, the other MRES, that's why I didn't write the acronym up there because I thought it would be confusing, right? They are doing a little bit more of a, hey, you do it, but we'll help model. And so Detroit Lakes and Moorhead are 2 of their members, and they said, we want to do community solar. We're getting interest from our members, but we just want some help figuring out the installation side or the contracting side, or do you know any solar installers? So MRES is doing more of a suite of, here are the services we can provide, but they're not just doing it for people. So just a couple different models out there. And we've been getting utilities together, like literally just, hey, utilities, don't worry, you'll be the only ones in the room. Come talk to each other about solar. Doing some peer-to-peer sessions and program support for utilities interested in this too. So.
Dan, did they just put one in service, didn't they? Or they're going to in the very near future?
Yes, they're working on it right now.
Yeah, because we got called to take our solar trailer there to be part of the event.
Oh, awesome.
So I know they're doing it soon.
Yeah, it's happening, and they have three of their Muni members, the larger ones, St. Peter, Austin, and Rochester, who have created programs already.
Is this new? Were you getting resistance for a while from the cooperatives, and now they've kind of turned a leaf and?
No, the cooperatives were actually the first. So the first community solar garden in Minnesota was Wright Hennepin, and they actually put that in the fall before the Minnesota community solar legislation came out. So they were actually some of the earlier groups trying it out. Yeah, I would say that there are, like, it kind of depends on the co-op, right? On their interest in solar. They're definitely more interested in this model than they are in distributed generation in a lot of cases, I think. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Distributed generation is what, individuals putting solar on their own roof?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think maybe what we're talking about is, it seems like Xcel drags their feet. So wondering if all these folks, these other co-ops, are like more gung-ho about it than Xcel is?
It's a little different because in Xcel's case, there are a bunch of developers who are building projects that are going onto their system, right? In this case, it's the utility developing solar on their own system. And so all they really need is to send out a little survey in their bill inserts to all their members and get enough people saying, sure, I'd sign up for solar. Here's a down payment.
Like green power programs that, yeah.
Yeah, it's like community solar is basically like a green power program where you can actually walk over to your solar panel and say, it's mine, right? So it's just got that more tangible connection. So that's really what these programs are for the co-ops and the munis. It's a little bit more of like green pricing plus.
Does Xcel have their own big, like these? Does Xcel have their own big community solar, their own?
They are building their own solar gardens in Wisconsin, but they aren't building their own solar gardens in Minnesota. Not yet, at least. They have come out with a new program called Renewables Connect, and it's kind of like their wind source program, except it includes solar. And it's very similar, where if you sign up, you get to keep the renewable energy credits, and they just rolled that out last month, I think, and had a window where people could sign up for it. But they're basically taking portions of their really large solar installations, so North Star, Aurora, the project out in Marshall, they're taking portions of those and dedicating them to Renewables Connect. So when you sign up for that program, you're actually getting solar from their projects they've already installed. And then you're getting wind, and you probably have seen the news. They just got it approved to like basically double the amount of wind that they already have on their system. So it's going to be a lot more solar and wind in Minnesota very soon.
In our church, we could do both solar and wind source. But then I saw when Xcel's plan came out, which I signed up with their church plan.
Yeah.
The Xcel would only let you do one or the other.
Yeah.
Is that still their position?
I think that's the case. They want you to be on, so their own programs. They want you to be on like Wind Source or Renewables Connect.
And that's why I went with our church, because I could do both.
Okay, gotcha.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was on Wind Source, now I have community solar, but I never took myself off of Wind Source. So I guess I'll be getting Wind Source when it's not sunny.
Yeah. Support it with the,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Somebody's business section, greater energy was highlighted because of Dakota and coal. So, are they trying to phase that out, or, you know, it was, yay, they're providing jobs in North Dakota with coal.
Yeah. I would say the biggest example of phasing out coal that we've seen announced is Xcel, saying we want to be 10% solar and even more % wind by 2030, and so that's the whole plan to switch some of the Becker coal units to natural gas. Haven't seen necessarily announcements like that, or at least I haven't. I know Minnesota Power has made similar announcements about switching to natural gas and trying to shift more to renewables too. Yeah. So there's still a decent amount of that out there, right? The transition will be faster for certain utilities than others, I think. Just to let you know, you'll probably see some of these at the state fair, but CERTs has a suite of resources, so kind of depending on who you are, where you're at, what kinds of questions you have, we probably have a resource on community solar for you. So whether you're just a resident looking to see like what's in a good contract, if you're trying to crunch the numbers and actually see like, is this going to pan out for me over the next 25 years? Or I'd like to compare these 3 proposals I have, which are very different. How will they compare to each other over 25 years? We have some nice calculators where you can check that out. We have a nice suite of resources just for local governments thinking about this. And then we have another sheet that's more like tips for communities, like is your church or another group thinking about community solar? Are you going to run around and get people to sign up for one company, or are you just going to promote it generally to people, that sort of thing. So if you're looking for anything, it's there, and if it's not there, then let me know, because we might have something in the works. We're sort of like the community solar education people in Minnesota. It gets more, our community solar resources get more hits than our homepage. So that just tells you how much interest there is. We also have a section of our community or our Clean Energy Project Builder website that is dedicated to solar gardens. And it's been recently updated. So if you're trying to see where are there still available solar gardens that I could subscribe to, you'll find them on the Project Builder website. So if you're curious about that or you know someone who is, it also now lists whether they're taking residential or just commercial subscribers. So that's kind of helpful because a lot of community solar developers are just working with commercial industrial folks. So, what else is happening in solar in Minnesota? So how many of you have heard of the SunShot from Department of Energy? Yeah, okay, good number. So there are a couple kind of cool SunShot funded programs right now happening in Minnesota. One of them is the Solar in Your Community Challenge. And so a bunch of different community groups signed up for competitive grants from DOE. Several of them got them, and they range from just getting more people to install solar on their roofs in a certain town to trying to help low-income subscribers in Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe reservation, trying to figure out how can we get people with really low credit scores or no credit history to be able to benefit from community solar. Let's try to figure that out. So some kind of meaty projects like that where they're trying to figure out some stuff. And then basically just do more education, very visible education, and trying to bring down the costs and barriers to solar in communities. So that's a cool one. You can check out their website and see the teams in Minnesota who are working, and I think they might have another round opening up for projects in the future. Another one that we're working on a lot is called SolSmart. And so the goal, and has anyone heard of SolSmart? No? Okay, goal is to get local governments to become solar ready. And so they're actually, we're going through and we're working with local governments to get themselves certified as bronze, silver, or gold for solar readiness. And so it's kind of this big mix of things that they can do, but it's working on their ordinances. So where can people put solar or not? Why or why not? How does that all work in your town? So we're kind of trying to get ahead of some of the cities and counties who are doing more anti-solar actions, where no thanks, we don't want solar here. We'll just write a little policy that says we don't want that, and there we go. Trying to make sure that that doesn't happen in too many places. and trying to really identify and build some leaders among local governments who are doing all the right things for getting solar, increasing solar penetration in their communities. So we have a cadre of local governments that are working with us, and then we're bringing all sorts of experts to their doorsteps to say, hey, let's do this, let's make solar a big deal in your community. So that's SolarSmart.
When you do that, when you're
Yeah.
working with communities like that, want to make them solar ready,
Yeah.
do you also, is that where your efficiency program comes into, where you're sort of tightening their buildings and, you know?
Definitely, yeah. Energy efficiency first, right, and then solar. So that's always the message, definitely.
Okay.
But like we just had we do a lot of webinars with the participating local governments. We just had one of the foremost code experts on solar in the country, who happens to be in California, big shocker, right? He just got on and talked about building codes and enforcement and all sorts of stuff with these local governments. And so they actually have the folks who are responsible for giving out building permits for these cities. They're getting on the call and learning all about how to not make your permitting process a negative experience for solar, right? So, oh, we didn't even know that our building permits were keeping people from doing solar, but now we know we have a best practice template to use for that process. So that kind of thing, yeah.
Do you ever advocate for putting solar on municipal buildings? I mean, that's one
Yeah.
area that we've been looking at in another organization.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes, 2 thumbs up.
Could you give a presentation if we asked you to come to City Hall?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the parts of this is, okay, so you as a local government want to do solar, but sometimes that's kind of tricky because you can't benefit from like the 30% tax credit that makes a lot of this work happen, right? So one of the things we did as part of this project was to put together a model third-party RFP for solar in general for local government. So you could work with a third-party developer who could install the solar, has a tax appetite, and can take that 30% tax credit. And then you can finance that project with them and benefit from those savings since you can't get the tax credit yourself. So we have a model RFP for that and a model PPA also. So we'd be happy to work with you. Pete Lindstrom, the mayor of Falcon Heights, who she was mentioning, he's actually the gentleman who is working specifically on that program. So if you chat with me after, I can make sure that you get connected with him because that's his job. Did you have a question?
I was just referring to that.
Oh, great, cool, in the know. So that's SolarSmart, and that's some of what we're trying to do with local governments. And then another project that just started and is going to be happening over the next 3 years is a little more focused on, okay, so we have this goal in Minnesota. How many people know that we have a goal for solar in Minnesota? 10% by 2030, okay? So that is our state's goal. And so we're trying to help people understand, gosh, that is a lot of solar. How are we going to get there? What does that look like for the utilities who are going to have that on their system? And what are the other sorts of things we can do from demand response, from smart meters, from enhanced hosting capacity, trying to look at the processes that utilities have for taking in requests and putting those back out in a timely manner. What does that all look like, and what are those pathways to get Minnesota to 10% by 2030? So that's a really cool project that I get to do all the communication stuff for, so that's kind of exciting. But it's looking at what does 10 to 50 years look like? What are the high-level scenarios that could work? In 3 to 10 years, what do we have to do to get there? And then in the next 3 years, how can we try to reduce barriers to getting more solar online? So that's kind of a generic way of looking at it, but it's a surprisingly broad group of partners working on it. So there are actually utilities who, including Xcel, Minnesota Power, Great River Energy, and Ottertail, who have signed up and said, yeah, we want to be part of this project. We want to be part of the modeling to look at what does our system look like with that much solar on it. And so we're going through and looking at various scenarios for solar penetration in different utilities. And it's kind of a cool process. You can see there are quite a few other people involved too. So we have MISO involved, who's doing a lot with transmission, right? So they're like, how are we going to deal with all this solar power on the grid? And then we have some national and international experts coming together who have done a lot more of this solar modeling work in the past. So
Is storage part of that too?
definitely, yep. Yes, it is. So it's sort of like, how much distributed renewables do we want? How much utility scale renewables, solar do we want? How much storage are we going to put in the mix? And then the modeling process is going to spit out, okay, here's what that would look like and how much we think it'll cost, and what you'd have to do to get there. So we're looking at a lot of different scenarios for that. But we're sort of in the behind the scenes research and crunching of data mode right now, but in the next year, in the second and third year of the project, there's going to be a lot more public sharing of the results, so I'd love to come back and tell you more about it at that point. And then I wanted to specifically touch on this topic of low-income community solar because it's kind of a hot one right now. You know, if we think that community solar really is this thing that can give anyone access to solar, how are we making sure that people with lower incomes actually can benefit from solar energy? So it's not just continuing to be this like, well, I can afford it, so I'm doing solar. So we're actually, this one on the bottom here is another example of a SunShot funded initiative. This effort called Clean Energy for Low-Income Communities is a similarly collaborative effort to the last one I was talking about, but bringing a task force of groups together from the folks from the state energy office to people like CERTs, to folks who are already serving low-income people like the CAP agencies to say, hey, how can we make this work? What are the models that are working and how can we roll them out more quickly? So that's kind of a cool project. And then I just put up 4 examples of things that are happening. Have people been hearing the news about? I can probably point to like a news article on each one of these, but has anyone heard about them yet? A little bit? Okay.
Just Shiloh, which is what Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't specify.
Right. So Cooperative Energy Futures, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, Community Power, and North Country Cooperative Foundation are all working together to say, hey, we want to make sure that people can subscribe. We don't care about their credit scores. And one of the reasons they're able to do that is because they're working with larger organizations who can be backup subscribers. So if someone defaulted on their subscription, they could say, oh, well, that's okay because this other entity we're working with is just going to take that from you. No big deal. So they're not worried about that. And they're basically like, you know what, we don't need to see someone's credit history. We can just make sure that they have a tendency to pay their utility bill, right? And so if they can pay their utility bill, they can pay for community solar too. And so there are a couple different models. The way that North Country Cooperative Foundation comes in is they've actually been working for several years with people who work or who are building cooperatives to own their own mobile home parks, or manufactured housing, I think is the correct term. And so they are saying, okay, well, we already own our housing. We've got this group of people who are already right here. Let's build solar. Let's offer them all community solar. So that's kind of one of the ways they're coming in. Rural Renewable Energy Alliance, or REAL, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, they've been working. They're probably the first group that started really trying to dig into this and say, how could this work? And they have a project called Community Solar for Community Action. And so they're actually working with Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe to say, okay, if you are already qualifying for and getting energy assistance, how could we put those dollars to good use? Instead of just paying for your energy bill over and over and over again, how could we put that towards solar so that you're actually putting it into something that's going to be around longer? So they're working with the CAP agency up there in Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe.
Yeah, and I was just curious, is that the real thing? I just heard yesterday that they're back talking about solar air heat.
Oh, really?
You know, but this project is tied back to PV, right?
PV, yes, this is PV. So they're doing both still. So they still have their energy assistance program they've been doing forever, where they're putting solar thermal air units on people's homes to offset their energy costs in the winter especially. But this is new. So I think they have they're doing 5 or 6 installations around the Leech Lake Reservation. And I think they have half of them installed already. So that one's in progress. Xcel Energy is working with Energy Sense Coalition and Dayton's Bluff Neighborhood Housing Services to provide, in a really similar way actually that Cooperative Energy Futures is talking about doing it, to folks that already, who are low-income residents of St. Paul's Railroad Island. So they looked there, they said, you know what, most of these folks are low income and they actually could really benefit from this, so let's not worry about credit scores. Let's just like get more people subscribed. And so it's creating access. It's not giving anything away. It's still saying you need to subscribe to this. But they are doing it in a way that just makes it more open and accessible to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to qualify for. Because a lot of community solar, as you may or may not know, you do have to have a decent credit score. More like you would buy a car or a house than for like just paying a utility bill, right? So then Minnesota Power, they have a community solar garden program, and they don't have anything formal set up yet, but instead they put out an RFP. It's like $55,000 that they sort of put out to the community to say, hey, community organizations, what are your ideas? How would you like to work with folks that you already serve to get them community solar gardens? We're open to any and all creative ideas at this point. Send them our way. So I don't know what's going to happen with that one yet, but that's been more their approach in trying to partner with local groups. So probably those are some examples of folks trying to work on low-income community solar, and I'm sure that there will be more. And I think, I just wanted to say, I mean, you mentioned the storage part of that. There was just a report out yesterday from the Energy Transition Lab at the U of M, and they came out with a great new report that's gotten lots of media attention, NPR News, Midwest Energy News, and a couple other stories too. And it's basically saying, hey, solar plus storage can beat natural gas in Minnesota on price and on anything else you'd like to compare it against. So I recommend checking that out. I also know that storage is coming way down in cost, and that we're going to be seeing a lot more of it. And it's going to make renewables, especially solar, even more viable, right? So that's sort of the last piece in my what's next. I think storage is going to make it possible to really hit much larger penetrations and compete more with fossil. So, questions?
Why they don't use those energy together, solar and wind? Because one to another can back up each other.
Yeah.
Why they don't use that?
There are actually a couple. Have you heard of Joule Energy before? Dan Joule. He's sort of the godfather of community wind in Minnesota, or the Minnesota flip model. And he sold most of his companies, but now he is actually going and doing these hybrid energy systems. So it is placing wind and solar together, which there are multiple benefits technology-wise, but also because it's windy at night and sunny during the day, right? Yeah. So they are actually doing that, and they're doing a couple pilot projects right here in Minnesota.
What's that called?
Dan Joule.
Dan Joule.
Yeah, I think they're just calling it a hybrid energy system at this point. I can tell you more about it if you ask, or Doug's looking like
storage involved in that too.
Yeah.
He's moved from Xcel up north.
Yeah, I want to say it's the local government in central Minnesota is the first group that's trying it out. Local government in central Minnesota. I did a blog post on it a couple months ago. I could definitely get you more info if you're interested.
So you mentioned that not very many utilities actually finance their own community gardens, and they, use the developer and then have them do the financing, and then they, take the energy and redistribute it. But if it's financially beneficial, like from a cost benefit perspective, for anyone to do it, why wouldn't the utilities just buy it themselves? Like, what's the pushback from Xcel saying, we're going to phase out everything and we're just going to go all to solar since it gives us a better, they can still charge the same prices on the utilities, and then they just get a bigger return.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, they have existing systems they're trying to manage, right?
Yeah, it's all stranded assets.
Yeah. So it's a big part of their mix, but they are talking about, and so I think that's why some of the transitions you're seeing aren't from coal to solar; they're from coal to natural gas, because that's just a retrofit on an existing plant, right? But it's a very, very good question, and I think that the economics are there for solar and wind, and they're one of the utilities that sees that, right? I mean, they have more wind than any other utility in the country. They get it. But I still think they can't say, well,
shut
Oh,
down.
yeah, exactly. It has to be a slower transition, and they're a group, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but they would probably prefer it to be that way.
Right. Weren't they saying they're shooting for 30% renewables by 2020 or some number like that? I mean, they've got a pretty tough goal they've set for themselves.
Yeah, it's an impressive goal.
Well, and they're being pushed. I mean, that's where the city of Minneapolis kind of said, you know, you've got to work towards these goals, or we're thinking about municipality utility or something.
Right.
So, I mean, there's things that you kind of got to put pressure on. You got to give it up totally.
With the recent adoption of a large-scale community solar project, has given communities, as you've been pointing out here tonight, the incentive to perhaps pursue something much larger and going to a utility scale and ultimately providing power for the entire city. And which is something, of course, that's been done in countries like Germany for some time now. And from what I understand, it's been quite successful. But here, being that we've got this well-entrenched power grid here in the United States, which has largely owned, of course, by various utility entities, they aren't going to take this line down, of course. They have to find a way to remain viable throughout this entire process. But now that it's not tomorrow or the next day, I mean, it's here.
Yep.
The technology is now allowing these things to occur. What do you see happening, say, in the next 5 or 10 years as far as the possibility of integration and still working cooperatively in some way, shape, or form
Yeah.
with the Xcel Energies of the world?
Yeah. Well, so I think that Xcel Energy probably more than a lot of folks gets it. Like, there's scale happening in Xcel Energy's territory that's not necessarily happening elsewhere. I do think that for the co-ops and munis, a lot of them, it feels like a much bigger change. And you have seen some of the changes to net metering. You've seen a lot of these fees, that are out there now. But then you also see a handful of co-ops like Candy Ojai and Lake Region Energy Co-op who are like, hey, you know what? A while back we started providing phone and internet service, and we have some ancillary services we can provide. Why shouldn't solar be one of those? So Lake Region has actually been talking. They're if you haven't chatted with their president or vice president, they're pretty forward-thinking dudes, and they're like, yeah, we're going to train our guys to do solar installs. Why shouldn't we just go install solar for our members? So some of it are starting. Some folks, I think, are starting to think like, how could our business model adapt so that we can benefit from this growth and interest and falling prices in solar. So I think that some folks are starting to get that, and I don't know. I think it'll be harder for some than others. But
Well, there has to be a change of heart, obviously, on the part of the major power producers. Until I moved back to the Twin Cities, I was a Lake Region customer for 10 years.
oh, really? Okay.
Up in northwestern Minnesota.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know where their power comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still predominantly solar.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And the likelihood of that being the case for the foreseeable future.
Right.
There's a lot of things that have to happen before they can transition off of that.
Right.
But see, that's part of the problem, because the co-ops, of course, are all affiliated, Great River.
Yep. Or whoever their aggregator
Great River
is.
is the wholesale power purchaser.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the co-ops.
Right.
And so that whole infrastructure that exists there, you have individual co-ops that say, well, gee, we'd like to go off on our own and do solar.
Yeah. So the kind of an interesting.
But what happens to the greater part of the organization which says, well, that's part of our model right now. We're committed.
Yeah.
We have these contracts that we have
Totally.
committed to buying this coal
They have to buy a certain, yes, they have to buy a certain amount from their G&T, okay? So they have contracts for that, and they have to live up to. An interesting example of this recently with GRE is that Conexus said, hey, we want to build a megawatt of solar. And Conexus is the largest co-op in Minnesota. So they have more members than anyone else. And they had to talk to GRE about that. Like, how's that going to work? You're building that much solar. Are you still going to be able to buy enough power from us? You know, how does that affect our contracts and everything? So a little bit, they figured it out, but it wasn't without a little bit of tension. And so I think that you might start to see that a little bit more too. So, yeah, but there are those agreements in place. You're totally right.
Do you know anything about the airport? They've got, on top of the parking ramps, they've got solar. In the lobby of the highest level, they have a monitor that's supposed to be telling how this thing is working.
Yeah.
And it's still dark as far as I know.
Oh, okay.
It's been about a year or so.
I don't know about the monitor. I'm pretty sure that project is installed and operational. Did the second half of it go in yet? I know that it's the superstructure, right, where they built it above the parking ramp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like it would shade itself pretty well, actually,
Oh, uh-huh.
under the right conditions.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about that particular project. Yeah.
So you said the goal from Minnesota is 10% by 2030. That was adopted when?
That was part of the legislation that passed in 2015.
2015.
Mhm.
So what damage, if any, did this current legislative session do? Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So it definitely means that less of that will come from the Made in Minnesota solar program, since that program got axed. So that's a decent amount of solar that won't come from that program. I think a lot of that capacity will probably come from utility scale solar, probably in Xcel territory. So,
Canadian company.
or the Canadian company, right? Helene, yeah, yeah. But they're employing people here too.
No,
They are.
I'm not, I get it, it is.
Yeah, yeah. But no, that's a really good question. It's hard to kind of tell what sort of lasting impact the legislative session will have, you know, and what'll happen when we get slightly more favorable folks in office again for solar, right? I think I don't know. You could probably hear more from Mencia about how they think that'll affect the next couple of years. I don't have my crystal ball quite as honed as David Schaefer might.
At the state fair, what about all of us volunteers tell the public when they come by and say, you know, Made in Minnesota's dead. What's our incentive? What's happening?
So it's true that that was a lot of money for solar in Minnesota. But one of the actual good things that happened there is that instead of it all just going away, there was a deal to get, was it $10 million more into the Xcel Solar Rewards program?
5 years.
For 5 years. So the Xcel Solar Rewards program, which is, you can get 30% of your project cost covered, and it's been responsible for helping make a lot of solar possible in Xcel territory, mostly in the Twin Cities. And most of the MIM money was going to Xcel territory anyway, I guess, as I understand. So yeah, so there will still be, it's kind of like breathing a little bit of life back into that program where it would have tapered out. It's going to get 5 more years of funding. So so there will be that. It's a little bit of a consolation, I think.
We got time for about one more question.
What kind of storage are they talking about in the future? I mean, you know, storing power, wind and solar. What?
Big stuff. No,
batteries or what?
Oh yeah, I think batteries, lithium-ion batteries will probably be the big thing, and that's what's coming down in cost so much right now, because that's what's going into cars and everything else.
They're developing cars like that using that battery technology, improving it to the point where they can easily store it.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll just start seeing really big flats, you know, big sets of batteries, I think, for utility scale projects.
There's a 1 megawatt system down in Slayton, Minnesota with Xcel that's actually tied between their wind system and their solar in Slayton. So I mean that's just in our state, that's just one of the things that they're working on. So
that's their pilot.
Yeah,
right.
Pilot. Yeah. So we need to stop, but I just wanted, you know, when Dan was talking about things changing, he published a story today in a newsletter he put out, talk about changing. GRE, Great River Energy, Dakota Electric, and
Local bus company.
Yeah, a local
In
bus
Lakeville, I
company
think.
just bought the first electric powered school bus in Minnesota. I mean, to me, that is so cool. I mean, talk about having an impact on things, and the fact that I would never have, personally never have guessed that those organizations would step up with something like that. So that was a really exciting thing to hear. So anyway, let's give Dan a hand.
Thanks, guys.